You ever have one of those days that starts off feeling just too normal, almost suspiciously normal? That was Walter's Tuesday. He got up, slipped on those old checkered slippers that had lost their grip sometime during the Clinton administration, and shuffled into the kitchen. The coffee pot sputtered like it always did, the house slippers squeaked across the linoleum, and the morning sun sliced through the blinds like it had a job to do. The whole place glowed in that warm, quiet way that made you feel like life was simple. But life wasn't simple. Not anymore. June stirred her tea like she always did, 2 slow turns, never 3, and sat across from Walter at their old oak table. She looked smaller that morning, not frail, just pulled back, like someone had turned her volume down. Then she said it. "I think I need to go." Just like that. No argument, no breakdown, no big dramatic music, just 6 quiet words that blew a 40-year marriage off its foundation. Walter blinked, looked around like maybe she was talking to someone else in the room. But it was just him, the creaky chair, and June's shaking teacup. "Go where?" he asked, half a laugh in his voice, hoping this was one of her strange little metaphors again. But it wasn't. She said she didn't feel like herself anymore, that somewhere between raising the kids and baking birthday cakes and folding endless laundry, she'd lost her name. She needed to breathe, to find the person she was before wife became her whole identity. And then she left. Walter didn't yell, didn't beg. He just sat there, numb, watching her walk out the front door with a small suitcase and a too light smile. The mail came. The neighbor's sprinklers kicked on. Somewhere down the street, a kid laughed, but Walter just sat. And for the first time in 4 decades, he had no idea what came next. Grief has this sneaky way of not showing up in tears. It shows up in how you suddenly start talking to your cereal, or how the sound of the refrigerator humming becomes your new roommate. Walter's house didn't just feel empty, it felt like it had been hollowed out. Her coat still hung by the door. Her soap still sat on the edge of the sink. He left it there, not because he was sentimental, but because moving it felt like erasing her, and he wasn't ready for that. He tried to keep up appearances, mowed the lawn every Thursday, even when it didn't need it, trimmed hedges that didn't exist, made a trip to the store just to buy 1 banana. The cashier asked how he was doing, and he gave that answer every older man knows by heart. Can't complain. Truth was, he had no idea how he was doing. His daughter called once a week. He lied every time. Told her he'd taken up painting. He hadn't. Said he was getting out more. He wasn't. Once, just to spice it up, he said he'd joined a local seniors book club. He hadn't read a book since '94, but it sounded good over the phone. Nights were hardest. That half of the bed stayed untouched. The silence stretched long, especially around 8 p.m., when June would normally flip on the news and start mumbling about the weather guy's terrible haircut. He left the TV on at night just to hear someone else's voice in the room. It wasn't heartbreak the way movies show it. It was more like fading. He wasn't angry. He wasn't dramatic. He was just quietly disappearing. And the worst part? No one really noticed. The turning point came on a Thursday. He opened the fridge and stared at a half-empty bottle of ketchup, a wilting head of lettuce, and a container of leftover lasagna from a church potluck he didn't even attend. And something inside him, something quiet and dusty, just whispered, "Enough." So he did something unthinkable. He sold the house. The realtor looked at him like he'd grown horns. His daughter nearly had a stroke. But Walter had made up his mind. That house was a museum now. Every corner a memory, every drawer a trapdoor to the past. He couldn't heal in a place built on used to be. He found the RV on a gravel lot behind a gas station, sold by a man named Rick, who wore flip-flops with socks and swore the engine purred like a kitten. The RV didn't purr. It coughed, it groaned, but it moved, and that was enough. He named her Louise, after his grandmother who once raised 5 kids on a Depression-era farm and still managed to whistle while sweeping the porch. Louise, the RV, had rust spots, a wobbly cabinet door, and a peculiar smell Walter later discovered came from an old jar of pickles lodged behind the mini fridge. But it was home now. His first night on the road, he parked beside a small lake. He tried to light a fire and nearly lit his sock instead, sat on a folding chair that pinched his thigh. And he cried. He cried for the woman who left, for the man he used to be, for the silence he'd mistaken for peace. And then, under a sky so big it made him feel small in the best possible way, he started breathing again. Louise broke down twice that week. Once in Utah, once just outside a truck stop with suspicious chili. But Walter fixed what he could, asked for help when he had to, and found, strangely, that people were kinder out here. They had stories too, losses of their own, and they shared them like warm soup. Somewhere along a scenic route he hadn't meant to take, Walter realized he wasn't running anymore. He was arriving. Walter never planned on Arizona. That's the thing about the road. It doesn't care about your itinerary. It'll throw you curves and flat tires and sunsets so beautiful they make you forget your name. He had pulled into a dusty desert campground on a whim. The kind of place that didn't even show up on GPS, unless you counted the dot labeled possible parking. The sign at the entrance said Moonshine Flats, which sounded like a place you either find peace or a raccoon fight. Walter parked Louise under a crooked mesquite tree, dusted off the folding chair, and set himself up for one of those still evenings where the sky turns into watercolor. He boiled some water on the tiny stove, made his usual cup of instant coffee, which still tasted like regret, and settled in. Then she showed up. A woman in her late 60s, maybe early 70s, with silver hair tied up in a bandana, and a dog that looked like a mop with eyes. Her RV was even older than his. If Louise coughed, this thing wheezed. She parked 3 spots over, gave him a nod like they were old co-workers, and walked her dog right past him without saying a word. It took 3 days before she said anything more than evening. When she finally did, it was about the stars. "They don't look like that back east," she said, pointing up at the kind of sky you only see when you're miles away from neon signs and cell towers. Walter nodded, then said something smooth like, Real Casanova stuff. Her name was Clara. She'd been traveling solo for 4 years, said she liked the road better than retirement communities and nosy neighbors. She made her own herbal tea out of plants Walter didn't trust, and told stories about hitchhiking through Montana in the 70s. She had laugh lines like riverbeds and eyes that had clearly seen joy and fire and grief in equal measure. They didn't fall in love or anything. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. But they understood each other. 2 solo travelers, gently orbiting one another in the same patch of nowhere. And in that desert, under strange skies and stranger constellations, Walter started to believe in second chances. Not always the kind you write home about. Sometimes the second chance is just waking up and feeling curious again. It was their 4th night at Moonshine Flats when Walter finally told Clara everything. They sat by the fire. Well, technically it was a propane flame in a dented metal ring, but it felt like a fire, and the stars were spilling across the sky like they'd been dumped out of a bucket. He hadn't meant to spill his guts. But something about Clara's silence, the good kind of silence, opened him up. He told her about June, about how they used to dance barefoot in the kitchen before arthritis made that a risky move, about the crossword puzzles, about the day she left and how he still remembered the sound of her teacup tapping against the saucer more than the words she spoke. He confessed he wasn't angry anymore, just confused, still a little hollow, like someone had scooped out the middle of him and left the shell behind. Clara didn't say much. She just sipped her herbal tea, nodded when it counted, and tossed a stick into the flame every now and then. "You ever wish you could go back?" he finally asked. Clara smiled without looking at him. "Sometimes. But then I think, I already did the going. Now I'm doing the becoming." Walter let that sit in his chest for a minute. Becoming. That word rolled around in him like a marble in an empty jar. He liked the sound of it. He liked the idea that even at 70, you could still become something new. He didn't say anything else that night. Just watched the fire crackle and let the warmth from her words carry him into something like peace. Walter stayed at Moonshine Flats longer than he planned. Not because of Clara, though she certainly didn't hurt, but because he wasn't ready to leave the version of himself he was starting to meet there. He started doing things differently. Morning walks turned into meditations. He wrote in a little notebook, sometimes poems, sometimes letters to June he'd never send. He even tried Clara's tea once, said it tasted like grass clippings and old wisdom. One morning, after a particularly vivid sunrise, Walter caught a glimpse of his reflection in the RV window. It startled him, not because he looked old. He'd made peace with that. It was because, for the first time in a long time, he looked present, like he'd come back into his own skin. Gone was the man who sat silent in an empty kitchen. Gone was the man who slept beside a cold half of a bed and tried to fill the silence with noise. What was left was a man with crow's feet, sunburned shoulders, and a spirit that had taken its sweet time returning, but had finally made it home. And he realized something. All that grief, all that loss. It had made space. Space for new stories, for unlikely friends, for silly dogs that looked like mops and campfire confessions and skies that reminded you just how big the world still is. Walter hadn't just survived being left. He had lived. Walter these days? Well, let's just say he's not the same man who used to stare blankly at a cold lasagna and wonder what day it was. These days, Walter wakes up to the sound of birds he can't name, in places he couldn't have pointed to on a map just a few years ago. He still drives that old RV, Louise, though she's got more duct tape than dashboard at this point. The cabinets rattle like bones when he hits 50 miles an hour, and the air conditioner has developed a cough that no mechanic can diagnose. But she moves. She always moves. And so does Walter. He's got a rhythm now, not a routine. He's had enough of those. But a rhythm. He wakes up with the sun, makes his lopsided coffee. He still refuses to buy a proper kettle, and steps outside like it's the first time he's meeting the world. Some mornings he stretches badly. Other mornings he just sits and watches the light shift across the trees, or the mountains, or whatever lonely stretch of horizon he's parked near that week. He doesn't chase much anymore. Not time, not people, not even answers. And he's learned how to talk to strangers. That part surprised him most. He used to think he didn't have much to say. Turns out he's got stories for days. Not grand ones, just real ones. About love that faded slow. About raccoons named Larry. About a woman who left and gave him a second chance without even knowing it. Sometimes, when he's parked for the night and the fire's going, and he's got a decent cup of tea in hand. Okay, fine, sometimes it's just a beer. He thinks about June. Not with sadness. Not anymore. He wonders how she's doing. If she found whatever it was she was looking for. He hopes she did. And he hopes she'd be proud of him, even if she'd probably roll her eyes at the duct tape on Louise's mirror or the fact that he still can't make rice without burning it. He's not lonely. That's what surprises most people when they ask. He'll tell you he was lonelier in that house with 4 bedrooms and a backyard grill than he's ever been out here on the road. Because out here, he's with himself. And after all the heartbreak, the wandering, the sleeping in Walmart parking lots, and nearly adopting a stray cat named Detective Whiskers, he finally likes who that is. Walter these days, he's not chasing the past. He's waving at it in the rear view. And he's driving straight into the rest of whatever life's got planned for him, with the windows down, the radio up, and the road wide open ahead. And that's Walter, a man who got left at 70, lost the only life he'd ever known, and still found a way to live. Not just survive, live. In an old RV with a name, a squeaky door, and a dashboard saint made of duct tape. He found sunsets, strangers who became friends, and a version of himself he never would have met if life hadn't cracked him open first. Look, life throws curveballs. People leave. Plans change. But if Walter's story tells us anything, it's this: you're never too old, too broken, or too late to start again. So if you're standing in the wreckage of what was, just know there's still a road ahead. And yeah, it might have potholes, but it also has stars. If this story gave you something, hope, comfort, or even just a reason to smile, go ahead and like the video. Subscribe for more stories like Walter's, because chances are someone out there needs to hear that it's not over for them either. Thanks for riding along. I'll see you on the next one.